An interruption. Kanai had been looking for an opportunity to speak to Horin about Nirmal's notebook, and he thought he had found it when the Mega entered a stretch of open water. He stepped up to the wheelhouse and held up the notebook. "Do you recognize this?" he said to Horin. Horin's eyes flickered away from the water for just an instant. "Yes," Horin said in a quiet, matter-of-fact voice. "Sar gave it to me to keep for you." Kanai was deflated by the brevity of his response. Considering how often Horin figured in Nirmal's notes, he had expected that the sight of it would trigger, if not a flow of sentiment, certainly a few fond reminiscences. "He mentions you several times," Kanai said, hoping this would catch his interest. But Horin merely shrugged without taking his eyes off the water. Kanai saw that he would have to work hard to get anything at all out of Horin. Was this reticence habitual, or was he just suspicious of outsiders? It was hard to tell. "What happened to it?" Kanai persisted. "Where was it all these years?" Horin cleared his throat. "It got lost," he said. "How?" "I'll tell you, since you've asked," Horin said. "After Sar gave it to me, I took it home and wrapped it in plastic and glued it together so that damp wouldn't get into it. Then I put it in the sun for the glue to dry. But one of the children, maybe Fakir, must have found it and thought it was a plaything. They hid it in the thatch and forgot, as children do. I looked everywhere for it, but it had disappeared. Then I forgot all about it." "So how did it turn up again?" "I'm getting to that," Horan said in his slow, deliberate voice. "Last year, I had my old home torn down so that I could put up a new house made of brick and cement. That was when it was found. When they brought it to me, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to send it by post because I was sure the address wouldn't be good anymore. I didn't want to take it to Mashima either. It's been years since she's spoken to me, but I remember that Moina goes often to the guest house, so I gave it to her. Put it in Sal's old study," I said. "They'll find it when it's time." That's all that happened. He closed his mouth firmly as if to say that he had no more to offer on this subject. The Mega had been on the other water for some 3 hours when Pia heard the engine skip a beat. She was still on effort on the upper deck, but there had been no sightings since that one gangetic dolphin earlier in the day, and this had only sharpened her eagerness to get to the Orkella's pool. A breakdown now, when they were so close, would be a real setback. Without interrupting her vigil, she tuned her ears to the engine, listening keenly. To her relief, the machine quickly resumed its noisy rhythm. The respite was short. 15 minutes later there was another hiccup, followed by a hollow sputtering and a few tired coughs, and then, all too suddenly, total silence. The engine died, leaving the Mega stranded in the middle of a Mahona. Pia guessed that the delay would be a long one, and she was too disappointed even to ask questions. Knowing that the news would come to her soon enough, she stayed in position, scanning the wind-whipped water. Presently, just as she had expected, Kanai came to stand beside her. "Bad news, Pia. We're not gonna make it today." "Probably not." Raising a hand, Kanai pointed across the Mahona. There was a small village on the far shore, he explained, and Horan was confident that the Mega could make it there by coasting on the currents. He had relatives in the village, and he knew of someone there who'd be able to fix the engine. If all went well, they might be ready to leave for Gargentola the next morning. Pia pulled a face. "I guess we don't have many options at this point, do we?" "No," said Kanai. "We really don't." Horan, already in the wheelhouse, soon brought the bow around to point in the direction of the distant village. In a while it became clear that the Botboti had begun to drift across the Mahona. Although the tide had turned and the currents were in their favor, their progress was painfully slow. By the time their destination came into view, the day was all but over. The village they were heading for was not directly on the Mahona's banks. It stood in a more sheltered location on the banks of a channel a couple of kilometers wide. With the tide at a low ebb, the riverbank now towered high above the water, and nothing of the village was visible from the deck. All that could be seen was the crest of the embankment, where knots of people had gathered, as if to wait for the Mega's arrival. As the Botboti edged closer, a few men were seen wading into the mud, waving their arms in welcome. In response, Horan leaned over the rails and shouted to them through cupped hands. A short while later, a boat came canoeing down the mudbank and pulled up alongside. There were two men inside, one of whom was introduced as Horan's relative, a fisherman who lived in the nearby village. The other was his friend, a part-time mechanic. There was an extended round of introductions and greetings, and then Horan disappeared below deck with the visitors. Soon the Botboti's timbers began to ring to the sound of the mechanic's stools. The sun went down to the accompaniment of much banging and hammering. A little later the twilight was pierced by an anguished animal sound, a frantic, pain-filled lowing that brought both Kanai and Pia racing out of their cabins, flashlights in hand. The same thought had come to the both of them. An attack, you think? Said Pia. Can't tell. Kanai leaned over the rail to shout a question to Horan below deck. The hammering fell silent for a second, and then a burst of loud laughter came echoing up. What's the deal? said Pia. I asked if there had been an attack, said Kanai with a smile, and they said it was just a water buffalo giving birth. How do they know? Said Pia. They know because the buffalo belongs to Horan's relative, said Kanai. He lives right by the embankment, over there. Pia laughed. I guess we were being a little too jumpy. Knitting her fingers together, she did a long stretch and followed this with a yawn. I think I'll go to bed early today. Again? Said Kanai sharply. Then, as if to conceal his disappointment, he said, No dinner? I'll have a nutrition bar, said Pia. That'll keep me going till tomorrow. What about you? Are you going to stay up late? Yes, said Kanai. I'm going to eat dinner, as most mortals do. Then I'm going to stay up and finish reading my uncle's notebook. Are you close to the end now? Yes, said Kanai. Close enough. Alive. I was still unwell when we returned to Lucy Barry, and Nilima put the blame for this purely on Horan. It's your fault, she said. You're the one who's been taking him to Morichapi. Now look at the state he's in. And it was true I was not well. My head was filled with dreams, visions, fears. Long days went by when I could not get out of my bed. All I did was lie awake and read Rilke in English and Bangla. To me, she spoke more gently. Didn't I tell you not to go? Didn't I tell you it would come to this? If you want to do something useful, why don't you help with the trust, with the hospital? There's so much to be done. Why won't you do it right here, in Lucy Barry? Why must you go to Morichapi? You don't understand, Nilima. Why, Nirmal? She said. Tell me, because I've heard rumors. Everybody's speaking of it. Does it have something to do with Kusum? How can you say that, Nilima? Have I ever given you cause for suspicion before? Now Nilima began to cry. Nirmal, that's not what people say. There are ugly rumors afloat. Nilima, It's beneath you to believe in these rumors. Then bring Kusum here. Tell her to work for the trust, and you can do the same. How could I explain to her that there was nothing I could do for the trust, that many others could not do better? I would be no more than a hand putting a pen, a machine, a mechanical toy. But as for Morichapi, Rilke himself had shown me what I could do. In one verse, I had found a message written for my eyes only, filled with hidden meaning. When the time came, I would receive a sign, and then I would know what I had to do. For the poet himself had told me, this is the time for what can be said. Here is its country. Speak and testify. Days, weeks went by, and there came again a time when I felt well enough to leave my bed to go up to my study. I spent my mornings and afternoons there, long swaths of empty time, spent gazing at the Mahona as it filled and emptied day after day, as untiring as the earth itself. One day I headed down a little earlier than usual after my afternoon rest. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard Nilima's voice speaking to someone in the guest house. I knew who it was, for I had spoken to him briefly the night before. He was a doctor, a visiting psychiatrist from Calcutta. Now Nilima was telling him she was very afraid for me. She had heard of something that was sure to upset me. She wanted to know how best I could be shielded from learning of it. "And what news is this?" the doctor said. "It won't mean anything to you, Dr. Babu," Nilima said. "It has to do with an island called Morichapi, which has been occupied by refugees from Bangladesh. They simply will not leave, and now I believe the government in Calcutta is going to take very strong action to evict them." "Oh, these refugees," said the doctor. "Such a nuisance. But of what concern is this to your husband? Does he know anyone on that island? What are they to him and he to them?" I heard Nilima hesitate and clear her throat. "Doctor, you don't understand," she said. "Ever since his retirement, my husband, having little else to do, has chosen to involve himself in the fate of these settlers in Morichapi. He does not believe that a government such as the one we have now would act against them. He is an old leftist, you see, and unlike many such, he truly believed in those ideals. Many of the men who are in power were his friends and comrades. My husband is not a practical man. His experience of the world is very limited. He does not understand that when a party comes to power, it must govern. It is subject to certain compulsions. I am afraid that if he learns of what is going to happen, he will not be able to cope with the disillusionment. It will be more than he can bear." "It's best not to let him know," the doctor said. "There's no telling what he might do." "Tell me, doctor," Nilima said, "do you think it would be best to sedate him for a few days?" "Yes," said the doctor. "I think that might be wise." I did not need to listen any more. I went to my study and threw a few things into my jola. Then I crept silently downstairs and went hurrying to the village. Fortunately, there was a ferry waiting, and it took me straight to Sajiria, where I went to look for Horan. "We have to go, Horan," I said to him. "I have heard there is going to be an attack on Morichapi." He knew more than I did. He had heard rumors that busloads of outsiders were assembling in the villages around the island. There were people such as had never before been seen in the tight country, hardened men from the cities, criminals, gangsters. Morichapi was now completely encircled by police boats. It was all but impossible to get in or out. "Horan," I said, "we have to try to bring Kusum and Fokir to safety. No one knows these waters better than you do. Is there any way you can get us there?" He thought about this for a minute. "There's no moon tonight," he said. It might be possible. We can try. We set off as night was approaching and took a long, fair quantity of food and fresh water. Soon it was dark and I could see nothing, but somehow Horan kept our boat moving. We went slowly, staying close to the banks, and spoke in low voices. Where are we now, Horan? I said. He knew our position exactly. We have left the Garjal and we are slipping into the Jila. We're not far now. Soon you'll see the police boats. And within a few minutes we saw them roaring by, sweeping the river with their searchlights. First one, then another, then another. For a while we hid close to the riverbank and Horan gauged the intervals between the passage of the patrol boats. Then we cast off again, and sure enough, by starting and stopping between the patrols, we were able to slip through the cordon. We are there, said Horan, as the boat thrust its nose into the mud. This is Morichapi. Between the two of us, we dragged the boat deep into the mangroves where it couldn't be seen from the water. The police had already sunk all the settlers' boats, Horan told me. We took care to hide ours well, and then, picking up food and water we had brought, made our way quietly along the shore until we came to Kusum's dwelling. We were amazed to find her still in good spirits. We spent the rest of the night trying to persuade her to leave, but she paid no heed. Where will I go? She said simply. There's no other place I want to be. We told her about the rumors, the men gathering in the surrounding villages preparing for the impending assault. Horan had seen them. They had come by the busload. What will they do? She said. There are still more than 10,000 of us here. It's just a question of keeping faith. But what about Fokir? I said. Suppose something happens to him. What will become of him? Yes, Horan added, his voice to mine. If you won't leave, let me take him away for a few days. After things settle down, I'll bring him back. It was clear she had already thought about this. All right, she said. That's how we'll do it. Then take Fokir back with you. Keep him with you in Sajilia for a few days. When this wind passes, bring him back. By this time, day had broken and it was too late to leave. We'll have to wait till tonight, Horan said, so that we can slip past the police boat in the dark. It was time now for me to spring my surprise. Horan, I said, I am staying. They were amazed and disbelieving. They kept asking me why I wished to remain, but I evaded their questions. There was so much I could have told them about the medicines that awaited me in Lusibari, about Nilamu's conversation with the doctor, about the emptiness of the days I had spent in my study. But none of that seemed of the least importance. The truth was that my reason for staying was very simple. I took out this notebook and I said, I have to stay because there's something I must write. I am out of time. The candle is spluttering. My pencil is worn to a stub. I can hear their footsteps approaching. They seem strangely to be laughing as they come. Horan will want to leave immediately. I know, for daybreak is not far now. I hadn't thought I'd be able to fill this whole notebook, but this is what I have done. It serves no purpose for me to keep it here. I will hand it to Horan in the hope it finds its way to you, Kanai. I feel certain you will have a greater claim to the world's ear than I ever had. Maybe you will know what to do with it. I have always trusted the young. Your generation will, I know, be richer in ideals, less cynical, less selfish than mine. They have come in now, and I see their faces in the candlelight. In their smiles, I see the poet's lines. Look, I'm alive. On what? Neither childhood nor the future grows less. More being than I'll ever need springs up in my heart. Kanai found that his hands were shaking as he put down the notebook. The lamp had filled the cabin with kerosene fumes. He felt he was stifling. Picking a blanket off the bunk, he wrapped it around his shoulders and stepped out into the gangway. The sharp smell of a beedi came to his nose, and he looked to his left towards the bow. Horan was seated there, in one of the two armchairs. He was smoking, with his feet up on the gunwale. He looked around as Kanai closed the door of his cabin. "Still up?" "Yes," said Kanai. "I just finished reading my uncle's notebook." Horan acknowledged this with an indifferent grunt. Kanai seated himself in the adjoining chair. "It ends with you taking Fokir away in your boat." Horan angled his gaze downwards into the water as if he were looking into the past. "We should have left a little earlier," he said matter-of-factly. "We would have had the currents behind us." "And what happened in Morichapi after that? Do you know?" Horan sucked on the end of his beedi. "I know no more than anyone else knows. It was all just rumor." "And what were the rumors?" A wisp of smoke curled out of Horan's nose. "What we heard," he said, "was that the assault began the next day. The gangsters who'd been assembling around the island were carried over in boats and dinghies and botbotties. They burnt the settlers' huts. They sank their boats. They laid waste to their fields." He grunted in this laconic way. "Whatever you can imagine them doing, they did." "And Kusum and my uncle? What happened to them?" "No one knows for sure, but what I've heard is that a group of women were taken away by force, Kusum among them. People say they were used and then thrown into the rivers, so that they would be washed away by the tides. Dozens of settlers were killed that day. The sea claimed them all." "And my uncle?" "He was put on a bus with the other refugees. They were to be sent back to the place they had come from, in Madhya Pradesh, or wherever it was. But at some point they must have let him off because he found his way back to Canaan." Here Horan broke off and proceeded to search his pockets with much fumbling and many muttered curses. By the time he'd found and lit another beedi, it had become clear to Kanai that he was trying to create a diversion, so as to lead the conversation away from Nirmal and Kusum. Kanai was not surprised when he said, in a comfortably affable tone, "What time do you want to leave tomorrow morning?" Kanai decided he would not let him change the subject. "Tell me something, Horenda," he said, "about my uncle. You were the one who took him to Morichapi. Why do you think he got so involved with that place?" "Same as anyone else," Horan said with a shrug. "But after all, Kusum and Fukir were your relatives," Kanai said, "so it's understandable that you were concerned about them. But what about Sar? Why did it mean so much to him?" Horan pulled on his beedi. "Your uncle was a very unusual man," he said at last. "People say he was mad. As we say, you can't explain what a madman will do any more than you can account for what a goat will eat." "But tell me this, Horenda," Kanai persisted. "Do you think it's possible he was in love with Kusum?" Horan rose to his feet and snorted in such a way as to indicate that he had been goaded beyond toleration. "Kanai Babu," he said in a sharp, irritated voice, "I am an unlettered man. You are talking about things city people think about. I don't have time for such things." He flicked his beady away, and they heard it hiss as it hit the water. "You'd better go to sleep now," Horan said. "We'll make an early start tomorrow."